Well, welcome to the Awesome Earthkind podcast. And if you would, please introduce yourself. Let folks know who you are, where do you live, and what kind of work do you do?
Hi, Ron. Well, I'm Riggs Eckelberry. I am the founder and CEO of OriginClear, and we're a player in the water industry. We're a public company, have been for many years under the ticker symbol OCLN.
Outstanding. Riggs, we like to start with what we call a quantum quote, an inspirational quote that kind of frames the conversation and lets people know your mindset about where you're coming from. Do you have one that you'd care to share, sir?
You know, for many years, I read this as a teen. I grew up in Europe, and I happened to come across this quote, and I carried it in my wallet for many years. And it's a quote by the author of The Little Prince, Saint-Exupéry, who, as you may know, disappeared in the middle of a flight over the Atlantic and was never seen again. But he wrote in one of his books that il n'est qu'un luxe véritable, et c'est celui des relations humaines. In other words, there is but one true need, and that is human relations. And I think that has propelled me in my interests all this time. And where I fall down, it's on human relations. Where I do well, it's on human relations. And that's kind of my axis.
Human relations, the key to all societal misgivings and positivity. So if we could just figure out how to get along with each other, we can accomplish anything. Great quote. Thank you so much, Riggs. Well, why do you do what you're doing, Riggs? Well, give us just sort of the motivation behind everything that you're about.
Well, Ron, I came up originally, I was, raised as sort of a transatlantic brat, and but I was imbued with this idea, that many of us had in the early 60s of, can we do something about the world and so forth. And eventually I spent a lot of time in the nonprofit space. And coming out of that in the early 80s, I really fell in love with the idea that, and I think that's your thesis too, that applied technology can solve our problems as long as we have humanity, but let's assume humanity for a second, because that's a whole other, rabbit hole. But just looking at technology, we can really transform the calculus. Let's look at, for example, clean energy. Technology leapfrogs can do far more than sort of mandating a static technology, and that becomes sort of this thing that people do. Well, I'm much more interested in how can we disrupt with technology than how we can adopt a particular thing. So the disruption itself, in my opinion, is a good thing. And I love people like Clayton Christensen, who wrote, he defined the term disruptive innovation. That was him, and what he said was that a disruptive innovation appears inferior to incumbents and underperforms on the traditional measures. So it's the underdog initially, and we need to, and people who have done a good job of bringing those to light, such as Elon Musk, have, despite them initially being a piece of crap, because we know the first Tesla was terrible, they persist and they make it real, and they turn it into something that even now is not really considered viable, but it's in the right direction, and he's continuing to disrupt. That's really, I think, my mantra.
Disruptive innovation. Outstanding. So tell us about your work with Origins and water, and what is it that you guys do?
OriginClear started out, actually, strangely enough, in the algae space. We were called Origin Oil, which algae is the original oil. All that petroleum is not dinosaurs. It's actually a lot of algae. The dinosaurs, there were not enough of them. And so algae is the most efficient fuel, whether live or fossilized. And at the time when we started, around 2007, it really, crude was around $120 a barrel, and there was an opportunity to come up with something competitive. Well, long story short, fracking came along. The oil industry innovated, and they had a disruptive innovation called fracking, which brought the price of oil down as low as $35. And we looked at it and said, you know what, algae for now is just going to have to be seen as a science experiment. It's not happening. What do we do? Can't just sit around and wait on our hands. And we decided to take our algae extraction technology and turn it into a solids extraction technology for water, right? Cleaning water. So at that point, we made a bid to turn our company into a water company. And, you know, looking back, I mean, before Origin Oil, which became OriginClear, I was a technologist. I went through the .com. I had these series of, you know, rapid exits, and, you know, almost like you almost become ADD, like, yeah, I'm in a company. Oh, we sold it. Okay. You know, and you almost don't get anything done. But fortunately, you know, we actually got some fun things done. And I was accustomed to being able to just rapidly change things. And I found the water industry was not into that. It was very stratified. You know, you had the government, which cleans most of the water, and the big water companies that service it. And that's the way it shall be. But they were falling down on the job. 80% of all sewage in the world is not treated at all. So we have a problem, and it had to be fixed in some way.
So, okay, so do you guys focus in on the input of water and clean water, or on the output and dealing with sewage and cleaning that up?
Well, we're about clean water. We have some projects to make incoming water clean, but the real problem is the water that's made dirty.
Mhm.
Because what's happened, people don't realize this, but the municipalities have been starved of funds ever since the 1970s. The federal government has spent less and less and less and less. The backlog increases by about $75 billion a year of unfunded infrastructure. So when the Biden administration did this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill, they only did $55 billion for the water industry, which is less than a year. So we conclude that the centralized government infrastructure is not happening. Now, what's to be done about that? Well, one of the solutions is to reduce the load at the center and do it at the margins where the water is made dirty. You're in the clean energy space. You're interested in things like greenhouse gases and so forth. Well, in fact, it's much better from a greenhouse gas point of view to treat the water immediately right where it's made dirty, as opposed to sending it to a central plant, and it goes through all kinds of exhausts, all these gases and so forth. And we did the math, and it really makes a lot of sense to do things. I'm a brewery, I make beer, I have a lot of effluent. I can treat it on the spot and send treated water to the municipality. And that means we don't have a big infrastructure problem anymore. We have a self-sustaining, self-responsibility model. And that is happening as I speak. This is becoming a mega trend that's largely invisible to the general public, because, you know, in my home, I can still flush the toilet and there's no problem. But businesses have seen the impact of bad infrastructure. And I might add that municipalities are constantly being given new mandates for, now they're being told to fix cyber attacks and, arsenic and this and the other thing. Well, they have no money for any of this. Well, let's fix it at the edges. And that is our mission now.
So give me an example of how this works, if you would.
Of course. Well, let's take this example of a brewery, which
Sure.
is a very good example, because they have a lot of effluent. It's not very toxic, it's organic, but there's a lot of it. And typically, there's been a lot of case studies where breweries have expanded so much, they've overwhelmed the local city infrastructure, and then the city goes, please, we can't take anymore. And they're forced. This happened, a lot of it in the Bay Area, for example, and they ended up having to put in their own water system. Now, here's the problem that we realized was going on. If I'm in the beer business, I spend my money on beer. I don't want to spend $1 million on a water treatment system. I didn't think that was it was not in my 5-year plan, right? So the capital is lacking. And we realized, hey, it's the money, stupid. If we solve the money problem, then these new self-sufficient, self-treating players can be funded, and we can simply deliver something called water as a service, which we know everything's going to a service, right? Well, now water can, and we're doing that. And here's what's even more interesting, Ron. In 1981, Apache Corporation came up with something called the Master Limited Partnership for Energy. Oil wells, pipelines, gas production, all of it. Investors like you and me could invest directly in this equipment and get royalties for the production. Now, the MLP has turned into a very, it's a $300 billion plus space. It's doing very, very well. About 60, 70 different partnerships out there. They didn't replace Exxon or Mobil. They complemented it. They gave the oil industry flexibility from a totally independent funding source that could fund exploration production or various things like that. So it's worked out very well for the oil industry. Now, as water moves from public to private, it makes sense to implement water like an oil well as well. Here's why. It opens up a whole new investor cohort, regular investors like you and me now investing directly in water systems, which they couldn't do until now. So we innovated on something called water on demand, which is we get investors to put money into a capital fund, which is then invested to help these breweries and housing developments and RV parks and virtually everybody trying to do their own treatment. And we pay for the machine. Please don't pay, just pay by the gallon. We totally give them a managed service. They're happy. Investors get a royalty. And we've created a new source of funding that didn't exist before, that is again going to complement the municipal structure. And it's going amazingly well, Ron.
Fantastic. So I work a lot with developers of new projects, particularly multifamily housing projects. So if a developer is in a particular municipality, let's say in New York or elsewhere, and they now have all this sewage or effluent coming out of their multifamily buildings, what would be the sort of approach and how would it work for them? And then so you basically have this machine, it goes into the output. So instead of going directly into the sewage system, it goes into your machine, and then out comes pure water that the municipality doesn't have to treat. Is that basically it?
Yeah, municipality calls it treated water, meaning it's not potable yet, but the city is perfectly happy to take it because all the heavy lifting's been done. The big problem that's occurred with cities is you hear about broken water mains. Fort Lauderdale, for example, has had a lot of trouble. Well, the mains that break are the pressurized mains. Those are the ones that go, psh, right?
Right.
Well, you can only carry sewage in a pressurized main. Well, you lose that main, now you're going to have a gravity feed, which means it has to be treated. So the municipality is super happy to receive water that's been treated to a level that only requires, for example, tertiary, meaning, take the nitrates out, and not a lot. That works perfectly for them. In addition, when I treat my own water, I can reuse it myself. I can do one or more turns out of that water before sending it to the city. So I get a lot more benefit for that water. So I get the water from the city, that doesn't change. Occasionally, let's say you're off the grid and you get your water from a well, and we do help, for example, housing developments with their water supply. That's part of what we do. But it's more importantly, they'll end up with a problem with, here I am, and I'm in Alpharetta, Georgia. I'm on top of a hill. It's going to take $5 million to connect to sewage, but I could just put in a system. Oh, and by the way, the HOA just pays per use on a meter. Well, that's a no-brainer. Like, done. Thank you very much. And automatically they have their treatment system. And we have clients who are housing developments, because we know the trend is towards rural, towards home offices, et cetera. And you run into this problem with rural, water districts being overwhelmed, et cetera. Again, the solution is take care of it yourself.
Excellent. So when you say they reuse it multiple times, how does that work?
Well, let's say that you're the brewery, you bring in clean water from the municipality. You have to clean it. You have to purify it. No, we know that, but fine. You purify it. You use it to make beer, and now you have effluent. Case studies have shown that you can reuse 50% of that effluent to, for wash downs, for steam vessels, not to make more beer. That's not necessary. So even that, you get a 50% bump of reuse on something you've already paid for. So it's like, that's a win, right?
Right.
And it works out financially very well for there's a case study of a Russian River beer in Sonoma County, and they were facing rapidly skyrocketing water rates and very tough demands by the county. And so they commissioned a system by a company like ours that does these don't pay upfront kind of deals.
Mhm.
And now they're saving money, and the county is delighted because they don't have to deal with it. So again, everybody wins. And that's
Fantastic.
really the new thing that's coming.
Great. So do you see, I mean, in the space industry, when astronauts are up there on the space station and other capsules, they're actually recapturing all of their waste and all
Yes.
their everything and then reusing it, making it so clear that they can actually drink it again. Is that where it's ultimately heading, or how far out is that?
There's, San Diego tried to do toilet to tap, and it has a PR problem.
Yeah.
Uh, Technologically, well, look, all water is reused. I mean,
Yeah, for sure. It's all,
the rain, it's raining here in Clearwater. I guarantee you some of it was pee from somebody, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And it goes
but
into the
people,
groundwater, it goes down, and it's got all sorts of stuff in it. So, hey, but okay. So it's really a PR thing, not a technology thing.
yes, correct. Now, when cities are doing this, they're really just going, okay, you know what? We're going to use that reclaimed water to recharge groundwater, for example. There's
Mhm.
great, you don't have to put it into people's faucets.
Right. Right.
You can do things like that. And groundwater is a major issue in this country. Even the Ogallala aquifer, which is under the entire Midwest, and I think it supplies something like at least a third of all produce is produced from that water in America. It's down in places up to 150 feet. Well, it doesn't take 10 years to reload. It takes a lot more than that. So we need to start recharging, and recharging soon, because you get sinkholes and you literally run out of water, which is a problem in many parts of the world.
Yeah, and it's becoming more and more of a problem all over the world, right? Except in certain parts that have an abundance, but most places now are starting to see fluctuations in water supply as the global climate keeps disrupted and changing. So, and then all over the West, I mean, for sure, water is a major issue where they're just not having enough. Okay, all right. So the trends that you see that are driving this whole thing, what do you think are the major trends?
All right. So first of all, and this was identified in a major study done by Lux Research in 2016, which is a major trend toward decentralization, enabled by miniaturization of the equipment, so it can actually be a box in the basement kind of thing. So that was a very important thing, and we have that today, and also it got into a lot of the best practices that were emerging for doing that. For example, many jurisdictions don't have good permitting in place for do-it-yourself water treatment. So there has to be updating of the permits. But generally, the local departments of environmental quality, DEQs of various states, are happy to enable that, as long as it's done by a good engineer and so forth. So that's not an issue. So really what it comes down to is the last brick in the wall, which is finance. And that's really sort of the hill we're attempting to climb here, which is to raise capital. And we're raising it from everyday investors because, again, that's this master limited partnership concept of direct investment, not by Wall Street firms, but by everyday investors, which is complementary to all the municipal bonds and so forth. This is a lot of fun because now we're able to go to housing development and go, listen, that $500,000 you need to come up with, don't worry about it. We got this. And we believe that it will accelerate things. Now, where it gets really interesting is in the third world. Look at India, for example. India is a tale of two cities. They have, on the one hand, a $90 billion hydrological project up in the Himalayas because there's all kinds of issues with deforestation, and I'm not going to get into it, but there's issues which they're having to spend tons of money on. And meanwhile, in the cities, they have humans hand cleaning the sewers, and many of them dying from the gases. And there's literally no infrastructure. Well, the solution there is not to try and spend more billions on central systems for which there's no room, is to, again, incentivize people in industries and large housing developments and so forth to have their own water treatment over time. We see that happening, for example, in Mexico, where there's been a lot of ignoring of water problems there. But as Mexico continues to do better and better, and it's really becoming more and more of a second world and soon a first world country, it's going to implement that, but it's going to implement it again on a distributed basis. And so it's kind of like the cell phone revolution. In Africa, we don't have landlines, we don't have telephone poles, we have cell phone towers. And so the countries with no infrastructure are going to go directly to the decentralized model. And then their centralized systems are just going to be basically collectors and redistributors of the clean water. And I think that's a very viable solution.
Outstanding. So yeah, the same sort of thing is happening in energy with decentralization of energy generation, whereas you get smaller and smaller power plants, whether it's solar or whatever else. And yeah, very comparable. Same thing obviously happened with computers, where we went from mainframes to much more distributed systems, with all our smartphones now having more capability than what took us to the moon on the.
But we're watching cat videos with it.
It's amazing. All right. So how do you see this whole future evolving? I mean, where is it going and how fast, and what's your role going to be in it?
Well, first of all, of course, one company is not going to be the revolution, but we hope to, we believe that we're putting in place a template that, because the water industry does understand this private utility model, they do it, but at a very large scale. For example, desalination plants for entire islands, and then the island residents just pay on the meter to the private company, and it's a good solution. They've never gone down to the Main Street businesses, the agriculture industry, local industry, and so forth. And so we think that's the next milestone, really, is going to be coming down gradually in scale. And as you know, that's the real challenge. Reducing scale is always the challenge. So it's easy and profitable to do big projects. Now we move down. So I see over the next 10 years, we're going to see increasing adoption of what the water industry calls DBOO, design, build, own, operate. The complete outsourced solution is going to be rolled out by many water companies. We think we're just the harbinger for something new. Now, I know as a technologist, and you know this too, is if you've got a lead, then by the time people get to what you do, you're already, several leaps ahead. And so we want to keep innovating and putting in place relationships and kind of, we don't want to be the MySpace, we want to be the Facebook. But the point is that we're an early mover in this space. We think that it's very, very, very needed, and that it's going to be the model of the future. I'm so excited about it. We're attracting all kinds of interesting people who've jumped into the space with us. Investors love this. They investors like royalties. And water rates inflate at about 3 times the rate of core inflation, which means that it's inflation-friendly investment, because we can even make it cheaper for that brewery and still stay ahead of inflation. So they're not like rents. We are able to actually, be inflation-friendly. So that's good. Plus, they become shareholders in this company. It's a great time to help this revolution happen with water on demand.
Fantastic. So as you've been going along, Regs, what are kind of some of the lessons that you've learned? What are the biggest ones?
Oh, yes. Well, of course, we've all had our experiences, the learning experiences. The saying is, experience is a great teacher, but she sends in big bills. So I licked my wounds for that. In the 80s, I had a startup in New York City, and the main thing, it was good, but it was early and underfunded, et cetera. And what I learned from that is really try and before you jump into an entrepreneurial thing, do some apprenticing, learn the space, get involved at some level with whatever's going on in that sector. It would have helped me a lot to have been a little bit less brash. In the 80s, of course, it was the 80s in New York, so. But I was like, okay, let's do this. And I revved it up and made many costly mistakes in doing a thing that ultimately ended up to be a major business, which was computer, IT services. It was a major, today it's taken for granted. So I was a pioneer, but I A, was not enough of an insider, and B, I was totally unaware of capital. So if you're going to do something, you got to think of those 2 things: know the space, know the sector, and have a sense of what your capital is going to be, your capital roadmap, because you're never going to have enough money. That's just the fact of it.
Never going to have enough.
So true.
Yeah, really true. All right. So what's next for you?
Well, we want to use this. What's great about this capital fund, we we've we raised that symbolic million since November 1st, which is good. So we want to sort of keep going with that. And we'll get, let's say but by the end of the year, let's say we're at 10 million. I'm just throwing that number out. Well, that's great because assets is what's needed to get you on the NASDAQ. And we are done with being a penny stock company. Why? Because there's been so many shady operators in penny stocks that it's become overregulated, and there's a lot of fraud concerns, rightly so. And so we have to constantly deal with the fact that it's not a great platform. So we intend to get on the NASDAQ. This capital program not only helps with everything I've told you about, but it also helps us get on the NASDAQ. And now we expect to have really good access to inexpensive capital because of being, a Russell 5000 company, perhaps. And that is where we're going now. Perhaps at some point, a big water player, American Water Works spends $1 billion a year on M&A. Perhaps will be purchased, but I tend to like, what, we're going to forge ahead. We're going to be the big player on the block, and we think we have a great future. And what I think is going to happen is eventually people are going to tell me, look, Riggs, you're not a great CEO. We really need you to be chairman. I'm like, okay, I can live with that. I can do that. That'd be fine by me.
Great. Well, we're coming to the end of our time here. So grand finale. What would be your piece of parting advice? And if you'd like folks to get a hold of you, what's the best way?
Well, first of all, to answer the second question, I do a weekly briefing every Thursday night, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And they just go to originclear.com and they can just sign up. And it's ask me anything. We say we're the most transparent public company in America. Ask me anything, I will answer it. And so that's a great way to be in touch with me. And by the way, if you get one of my newsletters and you hit reply, it goes to my inbox and I will do my best to answer it. So we like to have that kind of access because we learn a lot from it. But the real what I like about this is that I believe that high tech is coming to everything. So what I like is the integration of high tech lessons and disruptive lessons to even very, very conventional spaces like water. We have also in the future, not immediately, but there's a crypto, because again, crypto as an asset coin, not as a fictitious dog meme, is a good way to protect your capital from whatever's going on in the political world. So we think that there's going to be so much high tech implementation for everyday industries that you would be very mistaken to think that you can just bump along and use a paper Rolodex and do your thing. We're going to call you up, things like that. That's over. It's going to be all about high tech.
Technology got us here. Technology's got us in the mess we are, and technology's got to be there to get us out. There's too many of us not to have it happen. So great.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, Riggs. Anything that we missed that you'd like to touch on that you wanted to make sure we said? You said that we didn't get to.
Well, I think you've done a great job. I know that you're in clean energy, and the fact is that there is a nexus between energy and water, and some players, for example, there's an opportunity to take that waste and turn it into energy. It's not something we're focused on today because it's not a tent pole, but there ultimately is an integrated world because we generate so much effluent, and at the end of the day, even after you clean it, there's those organic solids. So all that stuff, I think, we'll end up with an integrated, smart energy / water / everything else kind of environment where we think about how these things are reused. And we'll end up, I think, being like, the good old Native Americans who managed to make use out of every part of the bison. Hopefully we can do that with our economy.
Yeah, outstanding. Wonderful. Well, Riggs Eckelberry, happy birthday, since it is your birthday today. So, and wish you a very wonderful, happy, and joyous year filled with good health and all that your heart desires. And good luck to you in OriginClear. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Ron, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you for the great questions.
Outstanding.